So to continue on with our grid assignment, guys, let's bring it back in. Start off by turning off the colors and centroids and everything else. Well, you don't have to turn off the centroid, but let's turn it off for simplicity's sake. I basically just selected everything on the right side and hit hide. Okay, so here's our key component, I think, at least for me it is the deconstruct brep. Or actually, where's this surface referencing? What is on? Oh, these are what's on. Okay, so I don't need those. I'm going to get rid of those and turn this on. All right, so the deconstruct brep is going to be my primary operator. So I'm going to slide it down here for now and slide it back a little bit later on. Right, so these are just kind of workflow things that I'm throwing out at you. You can, I have some other more advanced ones, but this is just simple to understand how I'm working with this. Okay. Centroid comes off of the area command. That's this one. So here's what we're trying to do. What I want to walk you through is how do you actually use a simple grid subdivision like this and take your component parts and construct a space frame. Right, so we're taking our exercise with pipes that we made in 2D, and now we're going to start working in 3D. Okay, so oh, I closed some stuff over here. So when we're working in 3D, we have to obviously use some form of either offsets or vectors, but we need to think about how we're going to translate across space, right? And there's obviously a couple ways of doing that. I'll show you two to get started. But the first of which is, well, I'll show you the not as great way, and then I'll show you the better way. But
so should we not follow until you get to
yeah, don't follow me yet. That's a good question. Thank you. But actually, another good question, which Gabby had here for a second. A second ago, I actually was up here and I had this note. And I use these notes actually to start preparing my lessons. And you can use them to take notes on what you're doing. Little tips and stuff about certain components and relationships. So if you want to add text like that, you go into params, and you go into input. You go into utility, and you go to scribble. Scribble means you can just go in and type whatever you want.
That's all you could type.
Yeah. Yeah, it says double click me, so you double click it and you just type whatever you want. Okay, so let's get back to business here. The deconstruct brep is what I want to work with. Turn that off, turn this on, and let's take a look at that as a surface, right? So to create a space frame, are you all familiar with what that is? No, not everyone. There it is. So a space frame is essentially a grid of truss-like elements that get tied together in secondary grids at their diagonals. Okay, so it basically means if you look at the way that it's laid out, this point is very simply a centroid that has been pulled down from being in plane with the grid itself and then connected at the diagonals. That's really all it is. So to create a very interesting and intriguing form, we can begin to deconstruct it in such a way. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Oops, I did it again. So we can, I just introduced to you move. Okay, so let's take a look at move. If we want to move it down, I'm sorry, I just introduced to you move, but first I want to show you another option, which is offset. Okay, so move and offset are very similar, but move is going to be your more versatile. Okay, so if I offset surface, whoops, I'm in the wrong, there we go. Offset surface. I can take all of these faces and move them down a certain distance along along its normal axis. Okay, so let's just call this 10 for now. Distance. So I can offset this surface, and then I can create a centroid off of it, but then I have to deconstruct it again. So I go to Surface, Analysis, Deconstruct BREP. Actually, maybe I don't. I think I can just get the centroids. So you go to Surface, Analysis, and you do Area to get the centroids like that. Okay, but my suggestion to you would be, rather than have a whole other surface that you need to get your centroids from, I would actually use Move in a simple application. Because when you're using Move, you can determine precisely where it's going to move. Or when we get into the more advanced option, we're going to use the surface normal. And then we're going to move it along the surface normal. That's the key operator.
Move is better than offset, right?
Yes,
Okay.
I think. But you could do it kind of with both. It just depends on how you want to approach it. Okay? That may or may not be clear, but my preference is to actually use Move. All right, so I'm going to kind of take a step back there and start reconstructing it with Move. So, whoa. So before we move, though, we need to find the centroid, right? And then from that centroid, we simply go to Transform, Euclidean, Move. And you're probably aware by now that the geometry you want to move is actually the centroid. See how it jumps up to where the other surface was? And then we tell it how far do we want it to go. So here's another thing that I'm going to introduce to you, is that when you're using the Move command, you set the orientation that you're going to move it. Okay, so for this application, our move is going to be in the z-axis, and that's fine. But we have to tell it the z-axis by going to Vector, Vector, Unit Z. Okay, so we're kind of seeing that those points are a little bit up there now. But take a look at the front side of Unit Z, and it says Unit Multiplication. So we override the value that goes into the Unit Z, and we tell it where we want it to go. So for me, right now, I'm going to start off with -10 less than, we'll start with 0, less than 10. And I say -10 because I don't know yet whether or not I want the space frame to be, below, which is typical, or inverted, which is, atypical. So I plug that in, and then here I can, actually, I'm going to go to 2 decimal places. Real number, go to 2. All right. So I can kind of pull it down a little bit like that. This is one move option. I'll make it a group so you can see. That's one option. You already saw offset surface, you can do it that way. But the other way that I want to show you here, and we're going to start to build them parallel to one another, is using surface normals. Okay, so real quick, I'm going to do the same thing here with a warped surface. So using control point curve, let's drop in another one of our surfaces that we're interested in creating. So I loft it, make it a surface like this, and that's fine for me. I don't need it to be mega warped. Yeah. So for me now, I'm going to copy this whole thing down right here. And instead of having it go back to the original point, I'm going to reference a surface, set that surface to the one I just made, and then plug it in. Oh no, I'm sorry. I need to subdivide it first. My bad. So go to set math domain, divide domain, and we tell it how much we want it to divide by. So I'll make this 0 less than 5 less than 10. Surface goes in there. Then we need an ISO trim. Right? See how we're seeing all the same things happening again and again and again? Plug that into ISO trim, and then we plug that into deconstruct. And we have a very similar relationship. However, here is our challenge. Instead of moving away from the surface, it moves directly down in the z-axis. So if I see that relationship there, it's not moving away from the surface, it's just moving up and down. Okay, so here is, well, let me set this up for you real quick too. These are both, well, this is math domain. Surface utility. Okay. Now we're back in business. So what we have to do differently is, similar to what we did the other day, find our surface normal and move it along that axis. Okay? So it gets a little complicated, but the first thing I want you to do here, and we'll pause the video at that point, is find the surface normal. Okay? So back under surface analysis, right? Because now, rather than the geometry, we want to reanalyze the surfaces themselves. So I'll move that over. I know that I need to get a whole bunch of things in here before I actually move it. Actually, ungroup that, and the centroid will probably fall somewhere in the middle. Actually, the centroid will be right. No, it'll be back there. All right, so we need to find the surface normal here. And if you recall, when you go under Analyze, there were two components that were very, very, very important. They were surface closest point and evaluate surface. Actually, maybe I should make sure you guys are all caught up to here, because I see some of you guys just looking at the screen. All right, I see you guys are like looking at the screen, and I probably need to get you here before we go any further. So, yeah, thank you for making it quite obvious. Also, if those of you guys in the back, if you see a lot of the people up here in the front falling behind, start waving at me like a maniac and I'll stop.